Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to New York and speak with Reggie Middleton of BoomBustBlog.com. Reggie Middleton, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Well, thank you, and as usual, it's a pleasure to be back.
All right, Reggie Middleton, you've been writing about the education bubble. Tell us about it.
Well, it's a bubble that's very similar to, I guess, all the other bubbles in the history of the developed nation. You have an excessive amount of debt chasing or funding asset that either has an inflated value and or a fictitious value. The debt is the student loan system, credit system in the U.S. Particular, and the assets are the diplomas that the loans are funding. The diplomas have, both in my opinion and from an analytical perspective, either inflated or fictitious values, and the debt is excessive. It's very easy to attain, and it's massive. It's approaching that of the subprime bubble at its peak, which was roughly about $1.3 trillion. The student loan debt market is piercing the $1 trillion mark and increasing by roughly, $100 billion or so per two-thirds of a quarter every other month, I think, at this rate. So we're looking somewhere about mid-year, it will be past the subprime debt bubble level in terms of aggregate amount. What makes it interesting is this is a different type of debt because this debt is not dischargeable. It says it's backed by the government, and it will follow you until either you die or until the government decides to forgive it, which means that the value has disappeared, poof, gone somewhere in ethosphere.
This brings up the 2 or 3 points I want to touch on. First of all, when you talk about the student debt bubble, of course, you're talking about a quasi-government agency called Sallie Mae, which is doing to student loans what Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac did to the subprime market, right? The government gets involved, they make money cheap, but they create this incredible bubble, which is now set to pop. And the second point is that from the crisis that blew up in 2008, there was some hope that there would be some reform that would stop Wall Street from creating these massive bubbles. But what you're telling me is that there has been no reform, and their bubble problem is still with us, right, Reggie?
Of course there's no reform. The only real reform is to let the market do its job. If you want reform, don't bail anybody out. You won't have to reform. Those who got carried away simply go out of business, and that's your reform. It's actually called capitalism. But again, we are pretty far stretched from pure or even applied capitalism for right now. Again, Sallie Mae is acting as the Fannie Mae of, I can't say old, because just a few years ago. And basically they're creating liquidity where liquidity doesn't belong. And that's what's blowing the bubble. This is worse because not only do you have non-extinguishable debt, but you also have the fact that there is no real recoverables. I mean, we're backing diplomas. The diplomas, some of the diplomas, if you look at it from a real perspective, a cash flow and return on an investment perspective, literally, as in mathematically, aren't worth the paper they're written on.
All right, so to make the comparison back to housing in the subprime market, in the case of housing, you've got a house, which is working as collateral to some degree in the financial system, and that collateral is being rehypothecated and reloaned and securitized, and it created this massive bubble that blew up. In the case of Sallie Mae and student loans, the collateral is the education that's being produced to create a person who can make money in the economy and generate growth and taxable income. But I gather from your work that that's not working either. The education system is not producing jobs that are creating any taxable income. The collateral value of a student in America is dropping along with this credit bubble. Your thoughts?
Well, there are several dimensions. Number one, there's an employment dimension where you have a structural change in employment, in my opinion. And even if you don't buy the structural change in employment, in other words, technology has either eliminated or caused the economic incentive to outsource many jobs. You have an increase in the service sector and a decrease in certain other sectors where four-year education would have been more amenable. Even if you don't buy that, you simply have very high unemployment. You know, if you follow the trend from the last 10 to 15 years, unemployment is at a cyclical high. That's number one. You know, in order to pay back the loan from your diploma, you need to have a job. Number two is the value of the diplomas. How many MBAs graduating out of mid-tier schools or even the Ivy League schools can truly earn their way out of a wet paper bag? Not many of them. They're taught what is called knowledge that, which is the type of knowledge that is rote memorization of information versus knowledge how, which the short version would be know-how, and that would be the type of knowledge that solves problems and creates things. A good analogy would be knowledge that, from a university perspective, would be the physics behind riding a bicycle, knowing basically what pressure is applied where and how the bicycle is moved forward from a physics perspective. Right? Knowledge how would be the ability to ride a bicycle. Okay, the ability to get on a bike and ride and keep your bounce without knowing the science behind the bounce. Now, from a earning perspective, you know how, a knowledge how pretty much reigns supreme. You know, if you're hiring interns, you want to hire somebody who can produce value for you outright versus somebody who knows the history of media but doesn't necessarily know how to produce value. You have a lot of those who spend, you know, $50, $60, $80, $100, $200,000 on an MBA and a bachelor's, you know, ripe with knowledge that, but once they graduate, they actually want to have an employer pay them, right, to teach them know-how or knowledge how, which is the inverse of what it should be.
Well, you know, Reggie Middleton, the graduates are entering a work environment that is not generating any meaningful income to pay off these debts. But I think more importantly, the institutions themselves, the universities, are gaming the system and gaming the government. I know from my own alma mater, New York University, it's become a real estate development ploy where the real estate developers at NYU are relying on guaranteed government Sallie Mae generated subsidies to speculate in the real estate market and utterly destroy Greenwich Village with gentrification for generating graduates where there's no jobs for these graduates. So again, it's welfare for the banks, welfare for the real estate developers, welfare for the top 1%, generating millions of students around the country where there's no job market. But I want to go back.